Bernie Sanders has spent a lifetime of battles against the establishment. I mean, you name it, Big Pharma, Medicare for all, housing, college for all, free childcare, the list goes on and on. But he has set his sights on something that concerns millions and millions of people: ultra-processed foods and their adverse reaction to our health.
Keeping kids healthy and away from ultra-processed food, unhealthy food, enormously important for the well-being of our people.
Ultra-processed foods are everywhere. They're convenient, they're cheap, and often taste amazing. But there is a downside that's easy to overlook. Ultra-processed foods are packed with additives, preservatives, and artificial flavors. These ingredients can mess with our bodies in ways we might not expect.
We've got an epidemic, and that epidemic of obesity and kids being overweight absolutely leads to a radical increase in the number of people with diabetes. And it's not only diabetes, it's other related illnesses.
I mean, these foods can lead to inflammation, disturb your gut health, and are often high in sugar, high in fat, and they have disgustingly high levels of salt. Over time, this raises the risk for chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. I mean, how many times do we have to say this? Ultra-processed foods are bad for you because they are made in a way that's really convenient, but at the same time are very specifically designed to get us to be addicted to them. And I don't think that being addicted to food is a very good thing to do. And that's something that Bernie Sanders really does pinpoint in this interview. So in a way, could this expand to pet food? Could this be the first step to having some sort of more in-depth regulation into pet food? Because some of the pet food, some of the most commercially widely available brands of pet food are absolutely rubbish, and they have the very same ingredients as the ultra-processed foods we have all gone very accustomed to living with.
And we learned something in terms of what Congress did 50 years ago. The Congress had the guts to say to the tobacco industry, very powerful people, sorry, you can't cause hundreds of thousands of people to die every year by enticing them to smoke. And as a result of that and other public health measures, by the way, we have reduced the amount of smoking in America very significantly.
You see the food industry in some ways akin to big tobacco.
Absolutely.
Decades ago.
Absolutely. And in fact, their strategies and their tactics are akin to big tobacco.
What's the cost to society?
Diabetes itself, I think, is running up a cost in healthcare dollars of some $400 billion. Unless we get a handle on this issue, that it will grow.
I mean, what Bernie is saying here is that big tobacco and modern food corporations share the same motives and the same modus operandi. They have the very same playbook and they have the same advertising tactics, the same lobbying practices, and the same mass media, to a certain extent, quote-unquote manipulation. They have a very well integrated sales pipeline and distribution centers, and they also benefit from the power of distribution. And they are actually using the same hooks as big tobacco used to do back in the day to get us to trust them. We have the very same epidemic in pet food, the very same, if not identical, ingredients we see in ultra-processed foods are incredibly prevalent in pet food. The prevalence of sugar and sugar derivatives in pet food is absolutely staggering. The prevalence of wheat, gluten, barley, or corn is absolutely skyrocketing in pet food. It's so widely available that it's absolutely ridiculous. If there is something that caught my eye was the difference in the amount of additives that Europe allows as opposed to America. And this is something that I always battle with when it comes to the EU, the European Union, because they seem to be extremely oversellers and they try to encroach into business in a way that American companies do not really have to contend with. But on this occasion, I do have to tip my hat to the EU, because actually reducing the amount of additives in food and pet food is absolutely crucial if we want healthier and happier pets. Obviously, the one thing Bernie doesn't really touch upon is the way that pet food companies are vertically integrated with vets. And some of these pet food companies have huge stakes in veterinary practices, in veterinary companies, veterinary conglomerates. And so they control the full stack. They control what they manufacture, how they manufacture it. They sponsor the FDA and so many other bodies in the world, such as the British Veterinary Association and many, many more, of course. They own the very veterinarians that they tell you to rely on their expert opinion on food when it comes to what's best for your dog. So they actually have a massive grip on the industry and a massive grip on what you get told about pet food. And I don't think that's really healthy for a marketplace. Another really interesting thing that Bernie Sanders doesn't really mention is that chocolate companies, yes, chocolate companies own and manufacture pet food as well. And these tend to be the biggest conglomerates in the pet food industry. So how would the majority of the population feel if their favorite chocolate company also manufactured the very pet food their dog or cat is eating on a recurring basis? And how would they feel if they knew that those very same companies either own directly or indirectly trade bodies and trade associations and even veterinary practices, and that a lot of the same ingredients in ultra processed foods are now in pet food and they are so prevalent, and the correlation between good food and health and lower vet bills. Another thing that's incredibly interesting is the prevalence and only focus on vets on just recommending kibble for our pets, and a very particular sort of kibble. Because if you think about it, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of options for kibble available to vets and to veterinarians, and they only seem to recommend a very narrow set of companies, maybe 2 or 3. And why do you think that is? Well, despite the controversies and criticisms, kibble remains the most popular choice for feeding dogs worldwide. It's very convenient, it's easy to store, it doesn't give you much hassle as you the consumer. So it's easy to see why this is so popular. Kibble is easy to store, has a very long shelf life, and is simple to measure and feed. For busy pet owners, it offers a no-fuss solution to feeding their dogs. But it does have a very long shelf life. I mean, we know this from our foods. If you see bread that can last up to 6 months or a year, or a food that has a very long shelf life, you instinctively know that that very food is not going to be the healthiest for you. It's not going to be as healthy as fresh fruit and veg and fresh meat. It cannot be. All the preservatives and all the additives they put in our food to make it last a very, very long time cannot be as good as fresh food. Yet kibble seems to be the most recommended option for our pets. The second one is cost, obviously. Kibble is generally more affordable than canned food or raw diets, especially when you purchase it in bulk. If you buy a massive sack of like 15 kilos or whatever the equivalent is in pounds in the US, a massive sack of pet food, that might last you 6 to 8 weeks, and that's a very, very long time for you not to go back to the pet shop. Also, many pet owners believe that kibble provides the necessary nutrition their dogs need, thanks to the quote-unquote complete and balanced claims made by manufacturers. I mean, hear me out for a second. What if I told you that you only have to either feed yourself or feed your significant other or your kid with just a bag of food forever, and that this bag of food is complete and balanced, and this very bag of food that has the same formula, the same nutrients day in and day out every time you are going to buy it, that very bag of food is going to be the best nutrition for you and your family? Would you actually take your GP seriously? Would you take your doctor or anybody for that matter seriously? If you had a family member with diabetes, with pancreatitis, if you yourself had some sort of health issue, would you trust anybody who hands you a bag of dry biscuits for you to eat day in and day out forever without changing a single thing about the food, without changing a single thing about the formula of the food and any nutritional value of the food? You would think that professionals is absolutely off their rocker and you wouldn't trust them. So why do we trust people who just hand you a bag of dog food, just one variant, and they tell you to feed it to your dog or cat forever? That absolutely makes no sense. If we have learned something from Bernie Sanders, or people like him, whether you like him or not, and I'm not going to get political obviously because that's not the role of this channel, the main point is that we should question and we should analyze everything we are being told by everyone, especially fast food companies or chocolate companies that get into the pet food industry, and they try to give you lectures, or they try to pontificate, or they try to influence how you feed your dog or cat. If there is any Bernie Sanders in you, you should try to fight against the establishment, because the establishment is there to consolidate and to get more and more powerful. The establishment is not going to all of a sudden change course and do what's best for you. They are only going to acquire more and more assets, and they are only going to acquire more and more influence. And at the end of the day, it's all going to be down to the bottom line, what's best for their pockets and what's best for their influence, because at the end of the day, these are corporations designed to make money. And if you look at the very ingredients of these commercial pet foods, you will see very cheap, very cheap ingredients, and you will see a one-to-one correlation sometimes to the very foods we eat ourselves that are fast foods. And to be perfectly honest, I do indulge myself sometimes in them, and they are absolutely wonderful, although I do feel terrible, and I am sure that you feel terrible as well, but I know, I am cognizant that they aren't very good. I mean, we have the case here in the UK that whenever you go into the NHS, the National Health Service, or a hospital, the food you get given is absolutely atrocious. The food we get given in hospitals here in the UK, one of the richest countries in the world, is absolutely appalling. We see so many foods with added sugars, we see white breads, we see margarine, we see extremely fatty foods, ultra processed foods, things like ultra processed sausages, for example. So if that is the state of hospitals here in the UK, what do you think they might do to pet food? You have no idea what they do to pet food. And it is our belief that that thinking needs to change, and we need to really get to grips with our dogs and cats' nutrition, because otherwise no one is really going to pay attention. Now, if you have always wondered what the best food for your dog or cat is, and if raw might be best for your pet, I highly encourage you to watch this video next. And if you are into enriching your dog's existence, we have come up with 15 Licky Mat enrichment ideas that are absolutely wonderful for your pup. Feel free to use the recipes as they are, and it's also a really good way to get some superfoods in your dog's diet. You can find the guide down below in the description.